What is going on, guys? Car Guy V8 here, and it is small block Chevy time. So what do we have in front of us today? Here we've got an 880 block, which this one just needs a little bit of cleanup and it'll be running again soon. Here we've got a 638 block, which this one needs quite a bit of cleanup, and I might have it running again by the end of the year, just depending on how things go. And here we have a 201 block. This is a pre-87 305. So this will be our example of an older engine when comparing to these two more modern ones. And a side note, I never told y'all what I did to this engine. The last video I had some theories, but turns out floated the valves pretty good. You can see hit the valves on every single piston, bent the push rod. So that's what the problem with that one, but that's a whole different video. So the main thing I wanted to talk about today was the 638 and the 880 blocks and what to expect whenever you're looking for one of these engines, and some slight differences between these two and the older stuff. So the first thing you'll notice when looking at an older engine is this one does not have the bosses on the top like these two do. These are factory roller engines. So you could put a roller cam in these. These earlier ones still came with flat tappet cams, but they had these provisions. So if you wanted to run a retrofit roller or a factory roller in them, you could, but not all of them were tapped. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. It may have had the bosses, but just because it has the bosses doesn't mean you can thread a bolt in them. I was lucky and these were threaded, so no machine work needed, or if you're skilled yourself, you could tap them. I was also lucky with this one in that it had a mechanical fuel pump provision. Not all of these engines had them. 880s, to the best of my knowledge, most of them do not have them. You can see that's just a bunch of casting material there. My machine shop will drill these out for you if you have to have a mechanical fuel pump, but it costs $200 to get that done. This one had it, fortunately. Now, the 638 blocks, to the best of my knowledge, started in 87 with the square body, the TBI square body. There may have been some in third-gen Camaros before then, so don't quote me on that, but these are the earlier roller blocks. The 880s are the later roller blocks, which this is still a TBI setup. This was a TBI replacement crate engine from the mid to late 90s. But most of these 880 blocks were Vortec headed engines. So getting one with this TBI setup is a little bit rarer. But speaking of the 880 block, I'm gonna tell you something to pay attention to when looking for these. Like, this is a major thing. You gotta pay attention to this. Some of them do not have this hole right here for the water pump bypass. It'll just be casting material because the Vortec engines flow, their cooling system is a little different from the older stuff. So sometimes you'll run across one of these 880s that does not have this provision. I've been lucky. All three of mine, which I'll show you two more 880 blocks here in a bit, all three of mine already have this bypass hole, so that's just a fortunate thing. Not all of them do. So if you buy one of these, throw it in an old muscle car or something, and just have one of your old standard cooling systems, maybe have the heater blocked or something, so that would have been your only bypass, you will overheat fast. Because if you don't have a heater, bypassing everything, and you don't have that, you're screwed. But look out for that. All 638s are already have that hole as far as I know. Let's take a look at a couple rocker arms here. I want to show y'all a difference. These are 193 head rocker arms, which are also what would come on the Vortec heads as well. You can see these are, let me get it close something so it tries to focus better. These are self-aligning rocker arms. You see that right in there, that groove? That will fit right over your valve stem, and it will keep it aligned. Now, the older style, like the 4.6, I'll get those later. Clumsy me. The older style rocker arms, like that would come on the 416 heads on this 305, you see these are non-self-aligning. The reason I mention this is I've actually personally done this before. You know, I play with small block Chevys a good bit. If you throw a more modern set of heads, where did that come from? I'll just set it there. If you throw a more modern set of heads, like these 193 heads, you see how they've got that circle hole right there where the push rod goes through. You need self-aligning rocker arms for that. Funny enough, I know this is crazy, 193 head, but this is an older engine, so this must be an older 193 head. You see how that's more of a slot right there, and this one is more of a hole. You gotta pay attention what rocker arms you run, because this is a self-aligning head. You put a push rod in that, it'll stay straight because that aligns it. If you put the push rod through here, you can see it's got all that wobble room. So if you use the older style rocker arm with this, it'll bend your push rod so fast. I've personally done that. It wasn't 10 miles later and I had major valve noise. I'm talking about terribly bent push rods. So pay attention to rocker arms. One other thing to note with the TBI headed setups is the center bolts are at a different angle than the traditional small block Chevy. So in order to get a carbureted intake to work, you've got to either order a special one or do some work. This is a Wien Street Warrior 8170 part number. You can see it's got the different angled bolts there. So this will work with a TBI headed setup. Now, if someone tries to sell you one of these and says, yeah, it's got Vortec heads, if it has those two bolt holes, they are not Vortec heads. Yes, they may be center bolt valve covers, you know, as opposed to the perimeter bolt valve covers. TBI headed setups were center bolt just like Vortecs, but Vortec heads, they only have 8 total intake bolt holes, 2 on each corner going straight up, nothing in the middle. So don't let somebody try to sell you a set of these heads and say that they're Vortec heads. But these 193s are not junk like people say. If you've got these, hang on to them. Okay, now I'm going to show y'all the Holy Grail small block Chevy. So this is the Holy Grail. And this engine has seen a lot better days, but I'm going to have it back going one of these days. It needs bored out and some serious machine work. But why do I say that this is the Holy Grail? Well, it's an 880 block that has the mechanical fuel pump provisioned. It's got the water pump hole right there that I was telling y'all to watch out for. And it's got the 3 bosses drilled. This is like the best case scenario for a small block Chevy you could ever find. I can't believe I happened upon it. It was actually a crate engine that was put in this thing, and it wound up just rusting internally from sitting for years. So I'm hoping to pull it out soon and actually send this one off to the machine shop, because this is the block everybody wants right here. Just when y'all thought I was done, I pull out another 880 block. Yes, this one right here, not quite the Holy Grail, but it's close. I'll tell you why. It, of course, had the threaded roller cam provisions, so I've got a roller cam in there. Water pump bypass hole, already there, worked just fine. So I was mainly just telling y'all that so that you know to look out for that. You can still drill holes in the thermostat, and it'll run a traditional cooling system just like this, you know, with no heat or nothing else. But watch out for that. This one, though, did not have a mechanical fuel pump provision. It has less casting than my other 880 block that I showed y'all, but you still have to get it done at a machine shop. So it'd be $200, I think they said. Motor Trend on Demand built an engine almost identical to this. Same AFR heads, same 282 cam, different intake, and a 383 bottom end, but everything else was identical. So what would that be? That would be almost 1 full point of compression higher and a RPM air gap intake, and they made 470 horse on the engine dyno. I figure that should put this one right at 400 on the dot with less compression, a little bit worse intake manifold. But I think saying this is 400 horse is not an understatement. It's fun, it's fast. And the reason I say that is David Vizard has said that he has broke cracked 3 of these blocks once he gets around the upper 400s to 500 horsepower. I don't know what he did to break them, and I looked for the material he was talking about, and I never could find it. But supposedly he's cracked 3 of them at upper 400 horse. But this one at low 400, maybe 400 on the dot, I beat it every time. I drive this car hard. This engine has a few thousand miles on it now, and it's probably more like 30,000 with the way I treat it. Constant 6,500 RPM rips. I mean, this is my hot rod right here. I have no trouble with this block. No qualms. I figure 80-90% of us watching will never have more than around 400, 450 out of one of these, just unless you've got a lot of extra money laying around. 350 to 450 horse is pretty easy on one of these, but once you get higher than that, you're spending some money on these small block Chevys. So I figure if it'll handle my constant abuse, the 880 block's good enough for me. So guys, I think that's going to conclude this video. Hopefully it didn't sound like a bunch of ramblings by a madman, but I have a feeling, at least when my mom watches this, that's probably what it's going to sound like to her. But thanks for watching, guys.